and then he managed to escape from his captors in the US and managed to reach the Iranian interest section in Washington, D.C., and he was able to get back to Iran in June of 2010. So when we look at this situation, what we really find is that in this campaign against Iran, language has been mangled. And I'm sure you know about this war on terror that they talk about. The Americans, when they torture people, they say, no, no, that's not torture. This is only enhanced interrogation technique. When they kidnap people to foreign countries to send them to torture, they call it extraordinary rendition. So when the Americans and its allies go and attack some country, they say we are promoting peace and democracy. And people who want to defend themselves are immediately accused of being terrorists. This is the case in Afghanistan, this was the case in Iraq, this is the case in Pakistan, this is the case in Palestine, and this is also the case in Iran. Now I'm reminded of what the philosopher Thucydides said, the strong do as they wish, and the weak suffer as they must. But what has happened is that in the case of Iran, it refuses to be intimidated, it refuses to play the weak card, it refuses to be bullied by the United States or any of its allies. It insists on defending its rights. And you know, in Obama's State of the Union address that was delivered 2 days ago, Obama once again issued that threat that the United States is going to prevent Iran from acquiring a bomb, and no options are off the table. Now, of course, Iran has said that we are not building the bomb, and yet Obama insists that no options are off the table. So we can see who the warmongers are, who the blackmailers are, who the terrorists are, and yet it is Iran that is being constantly targeted. And of course, you know that his Republican rivals are even more outlandish in their statements. But I want to, first of all, share with you what Iran's position as well as rights are under the NPT, of which Iran is a signatory. And you know the NPT went into effect in 1970, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Incidentally, Iran is a signatory, Israel isn't. But 2 years ago, in September of 2010, when the NPT governing board passed a resolution asking Israel to open its nuclear facilities for international inspection, both the Israeli delegate as well as the American delegate said, this is unfair. Israel is being singled out. Imagine simply asking Israel to open its facilities for international inspection is immediately branded as being unfair to Israel. And Israel refuses to sign the NPT when it is well known that it has something like 200 to 500 nuclear weapons. Iran has opened its nuclear facilities to the most intrusive inspections in the history of the NPT. In fact, it accepted additional protocols in 2003 for a 2-year period, which no other country, none, had accepted or agreed to. Iran did that, and they said, okay, you can install your cameras, you can check everything of our facilities, provided, Iran laid down a condition, provided you lift these illegal sanctions that you have imposed upon us, and you negotiate with us in good faith. For 2 years, the West, which is basically the 5 members, permanent members of the Security Council, as well as Germany, they kept on delaying, they didn't want to negotiate in any good faith. So at the end of the 2-year period, at the end of 2005, Iran notified the International Atomic Energy Agency that we have had 2 years of intrusive inspections. We have accepted these additional protocols on our nuclear program, We have sealed our enrichment, uranium enrichment. That is our right under the NPT. Article 4 of the NPT states that member states are entitled to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. And the international agency has not found any evidence that Iran has diverted any of its enriched uranium for any illegal purposes. No evidence whatsoever. And yet, if you read the report that was released on November the 8th of 2011, you know what they said in that report? They admitted that they have found no evidence of Iran diverting its enriched uranium for any illegal purposes, but they claimed that we believe, that's what they said, you read the report and you say, we believe that Iran may be conducting a secret nuclear program. We believe. Now here is an international body that indulges in pure speculation. You would think that an international atomic energy agency, which consists of scientists, highly qualified people, who would talk in more precise language, say, we believe or we suspect. Well, wait a minute. If Iran has a secret nuclear program, how did you find out about it? I mean, let's be honest. If it is secret, obviously it couldn't be very secret. If you think or you suspect. But there is no evidence. But you know why that is the case? Because the current chairman of the International Atomic Energy Agency, a Japanese diplomat, Yukiya Amano, is in fact an American puppet. And I'm not making an allegation. This is in the WikiLeaks documents that were released in October of 2009. And the American charge in Vienna, in his cables that were sent to the State Department, he actually said that Amano is our man. These are the WikiLeaks cables. He said, Amano is our man. He will do what we tell him to do. But we have only a limited window of opportunity, because if we do not direct him in a certain direction, then the other bureaucrats in the agency are going to bring it back to the normal principles that the agency applies. So that explains this report that was issued on November the 8th of 2011, in which the agency wrote, we believe, we suspect, we think Iran is not telling us everything, etc. And in fact, some of the arguments they raised, or some of the objections, they said that Iran must open its missile program for inspection. Now, if you are familiar with the NPT, that is involved with nuclear proliferation, not with any country building missiles. Building missiles has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. And yet, the agency was demanding of Iran to even open its missile program to inspection. And of course, Iran told them, go and fly a kite. Why should we open? I mean, you're not going to... the NPT requires... In fact, there is something incredible about the manner in which the NPT is being applied. In 1995, when the NPT had its convention or conference, almost all of the Arab countries refused to sign the NPT, demanding that unless and until the NPT puts into its resolution that the Middle East would be nuclear free, we're not going to accept the NPT as it is. So in 1995, the NPT put forward a resolution which was passed by the entire NPT members, that the Arab governments, in agreeing to sign the NPT and ratifying it, that the Middle East would be nuclear free. A few years later, when the Arab governments, and in fact Iran is on record as saying as well that they would like to have the Middle East to be nuclear weapons free, the United States immediately said, no, you are threatening Israel. To have a nuclear free Middle East, you are threatening Israel. This is the kind of logic that they use. And so, we now have come to a situation whereby there is a complete stalemate in the discussions and negotiations that are taking place between Iran and the P5+1, as they call them, the permanent five of the Security Council and Germany. And in fact, in the recent discussion that took place in Istanbul about a week ago, Iran's foreign minister announced that we are prepared to negotiate in good faith with P5+1. But there is one condition. And that condition is, or actually two. Number one, that these countries must accept that under Article 4 of the NPT, Iran is entitled to enrich uranium. That is its inalienable right. That's what the article says. She said, if the article says that we are members of the NPT, we are signatories, how is it that you refuse us or don't recognize our right? If you recognize that right, then we are prepared to sit down and discuss everything with you. Short of that, we cannot have any serious discussion because you are telling us to stop enrichment of uranium and continue negotiations and stalling until our equipment, our centrifuges, etc. are all damaged. You know, the reason why Iran does not accept the condition that it should stop enriching uranium, or it's handing over that uranium as Iran had proposed through Turkey and Brazil a couple of years ago, that there should be a swap, that Iran would hand over its 3.5% enriched uranium to the West, and simultaneously it would get the 20% enriched uranium so that it could use it in its medical research and other research work. The West said, no, we will take this material from you, the 3.5% enriched uranium, several tons of it, and we will take it and reprocess it, enrich it to 20%, and then we will give it to you. Iran said, no, we cannot accept that. And I'll tell you why they did not accept it. I'm not sure whether you are aware, but Iran's civilian fleet of aircraft are all Boeing manufactured planes. And as a contract for purchasing those planes, it wasn't by the Islamic government of Iran, it was done at the time of the Shah, but the contract was that spare parts for these civilian aircrafts would be provided by the United States, by Boeing Corporation. There was an actual agreement signed. It still exists on paper. And you know what's happening? When Iran asks for those spare parts for its civilian aircraft, not military, civilian, commercial airliners, the US says, no, we have a trade embargo, you cannot get these spare parts. And what Boeing Corporation is doing is that it tells Iran, we have these spare parts for you, come and get them. If you don't get them, we will keep on charging you. So here is the situation. Those spare parts are lying, or whether they are or not, we don't know, but Boeing says, well, these parts are available for you, we have a contract, you have to come and get them. If the US government stops you, that's not our problem. And you see, in 1980, the US government froze $40 billion of Iranian assets in the US. $40 billion in 1980. In today's terms, that would probably be about $400 billion. So what Boeing Corporation does is, it keeps on sending the bill to the US government for these spare parts that are lying on their shelf, not given to Iran, but they say they're available, Iran is welcome to take them. It's their problem whether they can get them or not. And Iran has had so many crashes of its civilian aircraft as a result of not getting spare parts from Boeing Corporation. So if the US government would not allow Iran to get spare parts for its civilian aircraft, how on earth can they trust the same West for nuclear material, for enriched uranium? So you can see that there is constant duplicity going on all the time. But you wouldn't hear about this anywhere in this media, neither in the Hamilton Spectator. I'm sure they don't even know about it. You know, but not even the Toronto Star, or I don't believe that Sun TV has the moral integrity to do that. In front of Queen's Park, it was a rally for Al-Quds, for Palestine. This is what I started off with. I said that as a Muslim, I am required, my religion requires me to believe in and respect Judaism and Christianity and their prophets. It is a part of my belief. I cannot be a Muslim unless I believe in that. And as a Muslim, I stand here to condemn anti-Semitism, to condemn racism, to condemn Islamophobia. But I also said that I make a distinction between Judaism and Zionism. Zionism is a political ideology. There are Jewish Zionists, there are Christian Zionists, there are even Muslim Zionists. Okay? So that's a political ideology. And we will resist that political ideology because it's a racist ideology. They actually had 3 programs on me. They didn't invite me. They invited other people. They kept on saying, he's an anti-Semite. That's the level of But let me come to the point, let's say, the US were to launch an attack against Iran. What would be the consequences? Before I go to that, I want to share one other thing with you, which is very important. You know, in 1990, when Saddam Hussein, now he's gone, when he invaded and occupied Kuwait, immediately in the media over here, throughout Canada, the US, the Western world, they started talking about Saddam Hussein using chemical weapons, and therefore he is guilty of war crimes and we're going to deal with him. Of course, Saddam Hussein had used chemical weapons. But I want to give you some background to when these chemical weapons were used, who supplied them, and what happened. You know, in October of 1983, I had gone to Iran, to the war front, because I traveled quite a bit. There was a war going on, and I had seen the consequences of the war, terrible damage caused on people, a lot of people had been killed, etc. I was contacted by Iran's Revolutionary Guards, and they told me that this is October of 1983, that Iraq is using chemical weapons against Iran's forces. And they gave me evidence of that. They took me to the hospitals to see the people that were affected by these chemical weapons. They had blistered arms, blistered faces, in horrible condition. In October of 1983, when I came back to Toronto, we published photographs of those victims of the chemical weapons that were used by Iraq's Saddam Hussein in our magazine. At that time it was a tabloid. And I also took all of those photographs to the Toronto Star, to the Globe and Mail, to the CBC, and told them, I said, look, Saddam Hussein is using chemical weapons. These are against the Geneva Conventions, and you have a moral obligation to publish this information. Not one newspaper in Canada or not one television station had the moral courage or integrity to write about Saddam Hussein using chemical weapons in October of 1983. But that's not the end of it. Saddam Hussein continued to use chemical weapons against Iran in 1984, 1985, 1986, 1987, until 1988, when the war ended. From 1984 to 1986, on 3 different occasions, I personally went to the United Nations in New York when the UN Security Council was debating the use of chemical weapons against Iranian forces. And the UN Security Council every year would send a delegation to the war front, and they would come back to report that yes, chemical weapons are being used, but they did not mention the guilty party. They said we condemn the use of chemical weapons. What kind of logic is that? What kind of nonsense is that? That you simply condemn it and you know that the only victims are Iranian soldiers, Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and Iranian journalists. In fact, our own correspondent was attacked by chemical weapons in Majnoon Island in February of 1984. Luckily, he was wearing a gas mask and protective gear, and he survived the attack. But thousands of Iranian soldiers and Revolutionary Guards were victimized by those chemical weapons. Not once did the UN Security Council, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, and you know who supplied these chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein? There's a company in Rochester, New York, that supplied those chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein. The British government under Margaret Thatcher set up a sarin poison factory for Saddam Hussein. The British government did that. The German government provided them. You know, our own government here in Canada, Brian Mulroney, while Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons against Iran, Brian Mulroney's government authorized $2 billion in aid to Saddam Hussein. $2 billion. And the United States government, I'm sure you all have heard of Donald Rumsfeld, that infamous guy. He was sent to meet Saddam Hussein not once but twice to give him, and the US had no diplomatic relations with Iraq at that time, and yet he was sent twice on behalf of Reagan to give the message of support to Saddam Hussein. And the US government authorized loans of $5 billion from a bank in Atlanta in 1986 to Saddam Hussein's regime. Okay, so this is, you need to keep that in mind. Now, it was only after Saddam Hussein invaded and occupied Kuwait in August of 1990 that the whole world woke up to Saddam Hussein using chemical weapons. He has weapons of mass destruction, so now we have to go after him. But by then, you know, within the next year or so, he had already, you know, got rid of all those weapons because he knew that if the Americans don't want him to have those weapons, then he must get rid of, otherwise he will not be allowed to stay in power. But you know, if you've been following the news, that from 1991 to 2003, Iraq was subjected to the most stringent sanctions that led to the murder of 1.5 million Iraqis. You know, in May of 1996, Leslie Stalls of CDC had asked Madeleine Albright, showing her figures and photographs, she said, Madam Albright, more than 500,000 Iraqi children have been killed as a result of US imposed sanctions. Do you think that is justified? And Madam Albright turned around and she said, given all these considerations and all the facts, we think it's a price worth paying. 500,000 children of Iraq were murdered, and Madeleine Albright said it on CBS television 60 Minutes program to Leslie Stalls on May the 12th, 1996. May 12th, 1996. So that's the morality that is now being applied against Iran. Okay, now, I want to come back to the situation because I don't want to take too much of your time. You may probably have some questions, etc. If you look at the map of Iran, I'm sorry I didn't bring one, but if you look at the map of Iran, on its eastern borders you have Pakistan, next to that is Afghanistan, and on the other side you have Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and then as you come around you have Azerbaijan, and then you have Turkey, Iraq, and then you have Kuwait, and Qatar, United Arab Emirates, all the way down to Oman. Here is the situation. In Pakistan, the Americans have an Air Force base in a place called Jacobabad, from where obviously they not only carry out operations in Afghanistan, but also in Pakistan as well as against Iran. This is an Air Force base that is used to spy on Iran. In Afghanistan, of course, you know that the US has something like